Book The Nose. Writer Nikolai Gogol. On March 25th, there took place in Petersburg an extraordinarily strange occurrence. The barber Ivan Yakovlevich, who lives on Voznesky Avenue, his family name has been lost, and even on his signboard, where a gentleman is depicted with a lathered cheek and his inscription also bloodletting, there is nothing else. The barber Ivan Yakovlevich woke up rather early and smelled fresh bread. Raising himself slightly in bed, he saw his spouse, a rather respectable lady who was very fond of drinking coffee, take some newly baked loaves out of the oven. "I won't have any coffee today, Praskovya Ospivovna," said Ivan Yakovlevich. "Instead, I would like to eat a bit of hot bread with onion." That is to say, Ivan Yakovlevich would have liked both the one and the other, but he knew that it is quite impossible to demand two things at once, for Praskovya Ospivovna very much disliked such whims. "Let the fool eat the bread, all the better for me," the wife told herself. "There will be an extra cup for coffee left," and she threw a loaf onto the table. For the sake of propriety, Ivan Yakovlevich put a tailcoat on over his shirt, and sitting down at table, poured out some salt, got two onions ready, picked up knife, and assuming meaningful expression, began to slice bread. Having cut the loaf into halves, he looked inside and to his astonishment saw something white. Ivan Yakovlevich poked it to his astonishment carefully with the knife and felt it with his finger. "Solid," he said to himself. What could it be? He stuck in his finger and extracted. A nose. Ivan Yakovlevich was dumbfounded. He rubbed his eyes and felt the object. A nose. A nose indeed. And a familiar one that. Ivan Yakovlevich's face expressed horror, but this horror was nothing compared to indignation which seized. Suppose. "You beast, where did you cut off a nose?" she shouted angrily. "Squander, drunkard, I will report you to police myself. What a ruffian! I have already heard of 3 people that you jerk their nose about so much when shaving that it's wonder that they stay in place." But Ivan Yakovlevich was more dead than alive. He recognized that the nose that of none other collegiate Assessor Kovalyov, whom they shaved every Wednesday and on Sunday. "Hold on, Praskovya Ospivovna, I shall put it on corner after I've wrapped it and rank. Let it lie there for a while, and later I will take it away. I won't even hear of it. That I should allow a cut-off nose to lie about in my room? You dry stick. All he knows is strop his razor. But soon he will be in condition to carry out his duty. The rake, the villain. Am I answerable for you to police? You piece of filth. You blockhead. Away with it. Away. Take it anywhere you like. Out of my sight with it." Ivan Yakovlevich stood there as too bereft of senses. He thought, and really didn't know what to think. "The devil knows how it happened," he said at last, scratching behind his ears with his hand. "Was I drunk or wasn't I? When I come home yesterday, I really can't say. Bread is something baked, and nose is something altogether different. I can't make it all that." Ivan Yakovlevich fell silent. The idea that police might find the nose in possession and bring a charge against him drove him into the complete frenzy. He was already visualizing the scarlet collar, beautifully embroidered with silver, the saber, and he trembled all over. At last he got out his underwear and boots, pulled on all these tethers, and followed by rather weighty exhortation from Praskovya Ospivovna, wrapped the nose in a rag and went out into the street. He wanted to show it under somewhere, either into the hitching post by the gate, or just drop it as if by accident, and then turn off into a side street. But as a bad luck would have it, he kept running into people he knew, who at once would ask him, "Where are we going?" or "Whom are we going to shave so early?" so that Ivan Yakovlevich couldn't find the right moment. Once he actually did drop it, but a policeman some distance away pointed with his halberd and said, "Pick it up, you have dropped something there," and Ivan Yakovlevich was obliged to pick up the nose and hide it in his pocket. He was seized with despair. All the more was number of people in the street constantly increased when the shops began to open. He decided to go City Isaac's bridge. Might he not just manage to toss it into the Neva? But I'm somewhat blamed for having so far said nothing. Ivan Yakovlevich, in many ways a respectable man. Like any self-respecting Russian artist, Ivan Yakovlevich was terribly drunk, and although every day he shaved other people's chins, his own was ever unshaven. Ivan Nikolaevich's tailcoat, Ivan Nikolaevich never wore a frock coat, was a peopled. That is to say, it was all black, dappled with brownish yellow and grey. The collar was shiny, and in place of 3 of the buttons hung just ends of thread. Ivan Nikolaevich was a great cynic, and when Colgate assessor Kovalyov told him while being shaved, "Your hands, Ivan Nikolaevich, always stink," Ivan Nikolaevich would reply with the question, "Why should they stink?" "I don't know, my dear fellow," the Colgate assessor would say, "but they do," and Ivan Nikolaevich, after taking a pinch of snuff, would, in relation, lather all over his cheeks and under his nose, and behind his ear, and under his chin. In other words, wherever his fancy took him. This worthy citizen now found himself on St. Isaac's bridge. To begin with, he took a good look around, then leaned on railings as took to look under the bridge to see whether or not there were many fish swimming about, and surreptitiously tossed down a wreck containing the nose. He felt as took all sudden a tone had been lifted off him. Ivan Yakovlevich even smirked. Instead of going to shave some civil servants, Chinsky said of her an embellishment bearing a sign, "Snacks and tea," to order a glass of punch when he suddenly noticed, at the end of the bridge, a police officer of disconsolate appearance, with white sideburns, wearing 3-cornered hat with a sword. His heart sank. The officer was wagging his finger at him and saying, "Step this way, my friend." Knowing the etiquette, Ivan Nikolaevich removed his cap while still some way off, and approaching with alacrity said, "I wish your honor good health." No, my good fellow. Not your honor. Just you tell me, what were you doing over there, standing on the bridge?" "Honestly, sir, I have been to shave someone and looked around see if the river were running fast." You're lying. This won't do. Just be so good as to answer. I'm ready to shave your worship twice a week, or even 3 times, and no complaints," replied Ivan Yakovlevich. "No, my friend, all this nonsense. I have 3 barbers to shave me, and deem it a great honor, too. Just be so good as tell me, what were you doing there?" Ivan Yakovlevich turned pale, but here the whole episodes come shrouded in mist, and of that happens subsequently absolutely nothing is known. Part 2. Colgate assessor Kovalyov woke up rather early and made a brrr sound with his lips, as he once do on awaking, although he could not have explained the reason for it. Kovalyov stretched and asked for the small mirror standing on the table. He wanted to have a look at the pimple which had, the evening before, appeared on his nose. But to his extreme amazement, he saw that he had, in the place of his nose, a perfectly smooth surface. Frightened, Kovalyov called for some water and rubbed his eyes with a towel. Indeed, no nose. He ran his hand over himself to whether or not he was asleep. No, he didn't think so. The collegiate assessor jumped out of bed and shook himself. No nose. He at once ordered his clothes to be brought him, and fled off straight to chief of police. In the meantime, something must be said about Kovalyov to let the reader see what a sort of man his collegiate assessor was. Collegiate assessors who receive their rank on the strength of scholarly diplomas can by no means be educated with those who make the ring in the Caucasus. They are 2 entirely different breeds. Learned collegiate assessors, but Russia is such a wondrous land that if you something about now. All the collegiate assessors from Riga and Kamchatka will not fail to take his applying to them too. The same is true all our ranks and titles. Kovalyov belonged to the Caucasus variety of Kalagatasar. He had only held that rank for 2 years and therefore could not forget it for a moment. And in order to lend himself added dignity and weight, he never referred to himself as Kalagatasar, but always as Measure. "Listen, my dear woman," he would usually say on meeting in the street women selling shirts fronts. "Come to my place. My apartment is on Sadovaya. Just ask where Major Kovalyov lives. Anyone will show you." And if the woman he met happened to be a pretty one, he would also give some confidential instructions, adding, "You just ask Lavi for Major Kovalyov's apartment." That is why we, too, will henceforth refer to Kolagatasar as Major. Major Kovalyov was in the habit of taking a daily stroll along Nevsky Avenue. The color of his dress shirt was always exceedingly clean and straight. His side whiskers were of the kind you can still see on practical and discreet surveys, or architects, provided they are Russians, as well as on those individuals who perform various police duties, and in general on all those men who have full rosy cheeks and are very good at Boston. These side whiskers run along the middle of the cheek, up to nose. Major Kovalyov wore a great many cornelian seals, some with crests and others with Wednesday, Thursday, Monday engraved on them. Major Kovalyov had come to Petersburg on business to with it, look for post befitting his rank, if he could arrange it, that of vice-governor, otherwise that a procurement offer in some important government department. Major Kovalyov was not averse to getting married, but only in the event that the bride have fortune of 200,000, and therefore the reader can now judge for himself what this major state was when he saw, in the place of a fairly presentable and moderate-sized nose, a most ridiculous flat and smooth surface. As a bad luck would have it, not a single cab showed up in the street, and he was forced to walk, wrapped up in his cloak, his face covered with handkerchief, pretending his nose was bleeding. But perhaps I just imagine all this, and nose cannot disappear in this idiotic way. He stepped into a coffee house just in order to look at himself in the mirror. Fortunately, there was no one there. Serving boys were sweeping in the rooms and arranging the chairs, some of them, sleepy-eyed, were bringing out trays of hot turnovers, yesterday's paper, coffee-stained, lay about on tables and chairs. "Well, thank God, there is no one here," said the Major. "Now I can have a look." Timidly, he approached with the mirror and glanced at it. "Damnation! How disgusting!" he exclaimed after spitting. If at least there were something in the place of the nose, but there is nothing. Biting his lips with annoyance, he left the coffee house and decided, contrary to his habit, not to look or to smile to anyone. Suddenly he stopped dead in his tracks before the door of house. An inexplicable phenomenon took place before his very eyes. A carriage drove up to entrance. The doors opened, and a gentleman in uniform jumped out, slightly, stopping and ran up the stairs. Imagine the horror and at the same time the amazement of Kovalyov when he recognized that it was his nose. At this extraordinary sight, everything seemed to veil from his eyes. He felt that he could hardly keep on his feet, trembling all over as though with fever. Had made up his mind, come what way, await the gentleman's return to carriage. 2 minutes later, nose indeed come out. He was wearing a gold embroidered uniform with big stand-up collar and doeskin breeches. There was a sword at his side. From his plumed hat, one could infer the rank state concealer. Everything pointed his being on the pay call. He looked right and left, shouted his driver, "Bring the carriage round." Got in that was driving off. Poor Cavallo almost went out his mind. He did not even know what to think of this strange occurrence. Indeed, how could a nose which, as recently as yesterday, had been on face, could neither ride nor walk? How could it be in uniform? He ran after the carriage, which fortunately had not gone far but had stopped before the Kazan Cathedral. He hurried into the cathedral, made his way past the ranks of old beggar women with bandaged face and two slits for their eyes, whom he used to make such fun, and went inside. There were but few worshippers there. They all stood by entrance. Cavallo felt so upset that was in condition to pray and search with his eyes for a gentleman in all church corners. At last he saw him standing on to one side. The nose had completely hidden his face in his big stand-up collar and was praying in an attitude of utmost piety. How am I to approach him? Thought Cavallo. From everything, from his uniform, from his hat, one can see that he is a state councillor. I will be damned if I know how to do it. He started clearing his throat, but the nose never changed his devout attitude and continued his genuflections. "My dear sir," said Cavallo, forcing himself to take courage. "My dear sir, what is it you desire?" The nose turning round. "It is strange, my dear sir. I think you ought to know your place, and all of a sudden I find you, and where? In church, you will admit. Excuse me, I cannot understand what are you talking about. Make yourself clear." "How shall I explain to him?" thought Cavallo, and emboldened began. "Of course, however, I am a major. For me to go out without my nose, you will admit, is unbecoming. It's all right for a peddler woman who sells peeled or an orange was scarcely bridge to sit without a nose. But since I'm expecting, and besides having many acquaintances among the ladies, Mr. Chektuaria, a state councillor's wife, and the others, judge yourself. I don't know, my dear sir." Here Major Cavallo shrugged his shoulders. "Forgive me if one were to look at this accordance with rules of duty and honor. You yourself can understand." "I don't understand absolutely nothing," replied the nose. "Make yourself more clear." "My dear sir," said Cavallo with a sense of his own dignity, "I don't know how to interpret your words. The whole thing seemed to be quite obvious. Or you do wish. After all, you are my own nose." The nose looked at the major and slightly knit his brows. "You are mistaken, my dear sir. I exist in my own right. Besides, there can be no close relationship between us. Judging by the buttons on your uniform, you must be employed in Senate, or the least in Ministry of Justice. As for me, I am in the scholarly line." Having said this, the nose turned away and went back his prayers. Cavallo was utterly flabbergasted. He knew not what to do or even what to think. Just then he heard pleasant rustle of lady dress. An elderly lady, all in lace, had come up near him, and with her slim one, in a white frock which agreeably outlined her slender figure, and in a straw-colored hat, light as cream puff. Behind them, a tall footman with huge side whiskers and whole dozen collars stopped and opened the snuff-box. Cavallo stepped close, pulled out the cambric collar of his dress shirt, adjusted his seals hanging on a gold chain, and smiling in all directions, turned his attention to a ethereal young lady who, like spring flower, bowed her head slightly and put her little white his trangulous fingers for her forehead. The smile on Cavallo's face grew even wider when he from under had the caught glimpse of her little round dazzling white chin, and the part of her cheek glowing with the color of the first rose of spring. But suddenly he sprang back as though scalded. He remembered that there was absolutely nothing in the place of his nose, and tears came to his eyes. He turned round, intending without further ado to tell the gentleman in uniform what he was merely pretending to state consular, that he was rug and cat and nothing more than the major's own nose. But the nose was no longer there. He had managed to dash off, probably to pay another call. This plunged Cavallo into despair. He went back, stopped for a moment under the colonnade, and looked carefully, this way and that, for the nose turned up somewhere. He remembered quite well that the latter and had a plumed hat and gold-embroidered uniform, but he had not noticed his overcoat, or the color of his carriage, or of his horses, not even whether he had footmen at the back, and if so, in the what livery. Moreover, there was such a multitude of carriage dashing back and forth and such speed that it was difficult to tell them apart. But even if I did pick them out, he would have no means of stopping it. The day was fine. Flowery cascade of ladies poured over the sidewalk all the way down from Police Bridge to an Antrim Bridge. Here came a court consular he knew and was used to addressing as a lieutenant colonel, especially in the presence of strangers. Here, too, was hearing a head clerk in the Senate, and great friend of his, who invariably lost at Boston when he went up 8. He was another major who had associated with causes, waving Cavallo to join. "Oh, hell," said Cavallo. "Hey, cabby, take me straight off chief of police." Cavallo got in the cab and kept shouting the cabman, "Get going as fast as you can." "Is the chief police at home?" he called out as he entered the hall. "No, sir," answered the doorman. "He has just left." "You don't say." "Yes," added the doorman. "He has not been gone long, but he is gone. Had you come a minute sooner, perhaps you might have found him in." Without removing the handkerchief from his face, Cavallo got back into the cab and voice of disappeared. "Drive on." "Where to?" asked the cabman. "Drive straight ahead." "What do you mean straight ahead?" "There is a turn here." "Right or left?" This question nonplussed Cavallo and made him think again. In its place, the first thing for him to do was apply to police department, not because his case and anything to do directly with the police, but because they could act more quickly than any other situation, while to seek satisfaction from the superiors of the department by which the nose claimed to employ it would be pointless, because from the nose's own replies it obvious that his fellow and held nothing sacred, and that he was capable of lying in the case, too, as he had done. He had done when he had assured Cavallo that they had never met. Thus Cavallo was on the point of telling the cabman to take him to police department when the thought again occurred to him that his rogue and swindler, who had already treated him so shameless during their first encounter, might again seize his first chance to slip out of the town somewhere, and then all sorts would be futile or might drag on, God forbid, a whole month. Finally, it seemed, heaven itself brought him to senses. He decided to go straight to newspaper office and, before it was too late, place on advertisement with a detailed description of the nose's particulars, so that anyone coming across him could be immediately deliver him or at least give information about his whereabouts. And so, his mind made up, he told the cabby to drive to the newspaper office, and all the way down it kept whacking him in the back with his first saying, "Faster, you villain! Faster, you rogue!" "Oh, mister," the cabman would say, shaking his hand and flicking his reins to horse whose coat was as long as lapdogs. At last the cab drove up to stop, and Cavallo, panting, ran into a small reception room where a grey-haired clerk in an old tailcoat and glasses sat at table, and in his teeth, counted newly brought on his coppers. "Who accepts an advertisement here?" cried Cavallo. "Oh, God! Good morning." "How do you do?" said the grey-haired clerk, raising his eyes for a moment and lowering them again to nest stacks of money. "I should like to insert—" "Excuse me, will you wait a moment?" said the clerk, as he wrote down a figure on piles of paper with no hand, and moved to 2 beats on the abacus with the fingers of his left hand. A livered footman, whose appearance suggested his sojourn in an aristocratic house, and who stood by the table with a note in his hand, deemed it appropriate to demonstrate his savoir faire. "Would you believe it, sir? This little mood is not straight his fare 38 kopecks. That is, I wouldn't even give 8 kopecks for it. But the Countess loves it. Honestly, she does, and so, however, finds it will get on 100 rubles. To put it politely, just as you and I are talking, people's tastes differ. If you're a hunter, keep on a pointer or poodle. Don't grudge a 500, give 1,000, but then let it be a good dog."